It was December 2007. The heart of the world's financial system was starting to crack. Lehman Brothers was teetering. Banks all across Europe were starving for dollars. Panic was flickering across trading floors from New York to Zurich. And somewhere behind all that noise in a room no one could see, the Federal Reserve made a phone call. A call that would reshape the global economy forever. There was no vote. No congressional hearing. Just a quiet line item buried deep in the Fed's weekly balance sheet called central bank liquidity swaps. Over the next 3 years, the Fed will create and move over $10 trillion through those swap lines. Think about that. $10 trillion printed from nothing, funneled to banks in Europe, Asia, and South America institutions with no ties to American voters, no accountability to Congress, and no limit on how much they could take. And here's the part that still echoes today. You pay for it. Every time your rent climbs, every time groceries cost more, every time your savings lose value while Wall Street hits new highs. That's the invisible price of being the world's emergency piggy bank and the system that made it all possible. It's still running bigger, faster, and more dangerous than ever. Let's go back. The official story of the 2008 bailout was simple. The housing market collapsed, banks failed, and Washington stepped in with a $700 billion rescue plan, the infamous TARP program. You remember the outrage, the protests, the televised votes. But that entire spectacle was a smokescreen. While the cameras were focused on TARP, the Federal Reserve was already deploying a far greater bailout quietly, in the dark through mechanisms nobody outside the central banking circle understood. Their weapon? Liquidity swap lines. Here's how they worked. A foreign central bank, say, the European Central Bank, would call the Fed. They'd say, our banks are out of dollars. If we don't get liquidity, the entire system could collapse. The Fed would agree. It would create dollars out of thin air, lend them to the ECB, and take euros as collateral. Simple. Technical. It sounds harmless. But the reality? The Fed had just sent billions of American dollars overseas to bail out foreign institutions. Deutsche Bank, Barclays, UBS, Credit Suisse. The very same players that gambled on U.S. subprime debt and nearly detonated the global system. Between 2007 and 2010, the Fed's swap operations totaled more than $10.5 trillion in cumulative loans. To put that in perspective, the entire U.S. GDP at the time was around $14.7 trillion. That means the Fed quietly deployed the equivalent of 70% of America's entire economy without a single vote cast in Congress. We only know about this because someone sued. Bloomberg News and Fox News took the Federal Reserve to court, demanding access to its emergency lending data. The Fed fought tooth and nail to keep it secret. For years, they refused to reveal who got the money. In 2011, they lost. A federal court ordered the disclosure, and what came out was staggering. The biggest borrowers weren't American banks at all. They were foreign institutions. Barclays from the UK got $868 billion. The Royal Bank of Scotland got $541 billion. Germany's Deutsche Bank got $354 billion. Switzerland's UBS and Credit Suisse got $287 billion and $262 billion, respectively. These were the institutions that fueled the bubble. And when the house of cards collapsed, the Federal Reserve, backed by American labor and the US dollar, picked up the tab. It didn't stop at banks either. The Fed lent to foreign central banks, which then lent that money to their own domestic institutions. This created layers of bailouts that made it nearly impossible to trace where all the money actually went. To this day, we don't know who all the final recipients were. The Fed's excuse? We had to save the system. If Europe fell, America would follow. The translation is clear. American monetary policy now serves global stability first and domestic accountability second. The US dollar became the world's bailout currency and the mechanism that makes it all possible. It's still active. In 2020, when the pandemic froze global markets, the Fed reactivated these swap lines with 14 foreign central banks. In just 3 months, it sent $450 billion overseas. Then again, in 2023, during the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse, the swaps were quietly extended. No votes, no headlines, just central bankers moving hundreds of billions with a phone call. So how does the Fed even have the authority to do this? Congress never approved such a power. No modern law grants the Fed permission to lend trillions to foreign entities. The answer lies buried in the original Federal Reserve Act of 1913, Section 14, an obscure clause allowing the Fed to conduct open market operations and international transactions. For nearly a century, it just sat there, dormant, ignored, forgotten, until 2007. That's when Timothy Geithner, who was the president of the New York Fed at the time, noticed that Section 14 could be interpreted to authorize foreign lending through swaps. No law was rewritten. No oversight committee was notified. Geithner simply decided the clause gave him the power he needed. He coordinated with Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, a former Goldman Sachs CEO whose old firm was entangled with nearly every major European bank on the brink of collapse. Together, they built the architecture for a $10 trillion global rescue. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait for a vote. They just acted. Geithner knew the system inside and out. He'd spent years at the Treasury and the IMF, mastering the art of cross-border rescues and monetary backdoors. Paulson, on the other hand, knew the stakes for Wall Street. His former employer, Goldman Sachs, stood to lose billions if the European dominoes fell. In 2009, as a reward for pulling it all off, Geithner was promoted to Treasury Secretary under President Obama. Man who had quietly authorized a $10 trillion operation became the most powerful financial official in America. From there, the infrastructure was locked in. By 2013, the Fed had formalized permanent swap arrangements with the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the Swiss National Bank, and the Bank of Canada. By 2020, 9 more central banks were added to the list. What began as a temporary emergency measure was now baked into the global financial system. It's automatic, unquestioned, and the public. We moved on. The headlines faded. The outrage vanished. But the machine stayed. The swap lines became a standing network, an invisible safety net for the very institutions that caused the crises in the first place. And here's the dark truth: they will use it again. When the next crisis hits, and it will, the numbers won't stop at 10 trillion. They'll climb to 20, maybe 30. Whatever it takes to keep the system alive. Because the Federal Reserve has discovered the ultimate power, the ability to create money from nothing and export the consequences everywhere else. As long as the US dollar remains the world's reserve currency, the Fed can print without immediate collapse. The inflation bleeds into foreign economies. Foreign citizens absorb the pain, and the illusion of stability continues. But the receipts are there, buried in plain sight. In December 2007, before most Americans had even heard the words credit crisis, the European Central Bank borrowed over $8 billion in a single day. That wasn't an act of rescue. It was the opening move in a game that still hasn't ended. Remember 2008? When the Federal Reserve opened those invisible floodgates, it wasn't just about rescuing banks. It was about rewiring the entire global financial system. What started as temporary liquidity became a permanent dependency. Central banks, commercial giants, even entire governments learned a powerful lesson. When things fall apart, the Fed will print, and they will be saved. With that, the US quietly became the lender of last resort for the entire world. Here's the part most people miss. Over 60% of all global trade and nearly 90% of all foreign exchange transactions involve the US dollar. Means when panic hits London, Tokyo, or Zurich, everyone scrambles for one thing: dollars. They sell their own currencies, dump assets, and drain their reserves, all to get access to the Fed's balance sheet. This overwhelming demand gives the US government a terrifying advantage. Every time the Fed prints, foreign economies absorb the inflation first. It's like exporting our debt and importing control. And the pipelines that keep this system flowing are the Fed's currency swap lines. They aren't just financial lifelines. They are geopolitical weapons. When a country is part of the Fed's swap network, it's effectively plugged into the American dollar matrix. If it's not, it's left vulnerable. This is precisely why countries like China and Russia have been building their own alternatives, like the SIP system and trading in their own currencies. They watched what happened in 2008, 2020, and 2023, and they realized that whoever controls the swaps controls the panic. But here's the real catch. The Fed's swap operations are almost entirely off the books. There's no public vote, no democratic oversight. Even the Government Accountability Office admitted in a 2011 audit that during the crisis, the Fed conducted over 21,000 transactions with foreign institutions, many of which were never properly documented. This isn't a mistake. It's by design. Each so-called temporary swap creates layers of liability and collateral that never fully disappear. The Fed lends dollars, foreign banks lend those dollars again, and they're supposed to be repaid in a foreign currency. But what happens if that currency loses value? The Fed eats the risk. And since the Fed's balance sheet is ultimately backed by the American taxpayer, you eat it too. It happens invisibly through inflation, weaker purchasing power, and asset bubbles that just make the rich richer. The Fed calls it quantitative stability, but it looks a lot more like quantitative subservience. Let's just follow the timeline. From 2008 to 2010, the emergency swap network is born. In 2013, the Fed makes 5 of those swaps permanent. In 2020, the COVID panic hits, and the swaps are reactivated and expanded. In 2023, during the banking turmoil, they're quietly extended again. And today, they never stopped. Right now, major central banks hold standing dollar liquidity agreements with the Fed. This means they can tap unlimited, use dollars whenever they want. Unlimited, instant, and with no public vote. It is as if the world's financial elite have a backstage key to the printing press, while the public is busy arguing over interest rates. Now, most Americans picture the Federal Reserve as a single building in Washington, D.C. That's not where the real power is. It sits in one specific branch, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This is where the swap lines originate, where global transactions are cleared, and where private banks like J.P. Chase, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs hold permanent influence. These aren't just abstract institutions. They are shareholders. They literally own the regional Fed banks. This means, indirectly, they profit from every single dollar that moves through those channels. So when the Fed lends $500 billion to the European Central Bank, which then lends to a major European bank, which then settles trades through a New York bank, guess who collects the fees? It's not you. So imagine this scenario. A crisis erupts, maybe a currency crash in Asia. Within hours, the Fed can decide who gets access to liquidity and who doesn't. This isn't just about money. It's about leverage. A foreign government that refuses to align with U.S. policy might find its access to dollars temporarily suspended. Their markets would collapse, pressure would mount, and suddenly, that government might become much more cooperative. All of this happens through the silent mechanism of monetary diplomacy. No soldiers, no sanctions, just a quiet squeeze of liquidity. These swap lines are the 21st century version of gunboat diplomacy, invisible, deniable, and devastatingly effective. And this is where it all connects to today. You've probably heard about central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. On the surface, they're marketed as innovation, faster payments, more transparent transactions. But underneath the public relations campaign, they are the perfect complement to the swap system. A global digital dollar network would allow the Fed to inject liquidity, not just in the central banks, but directly into digital wallets, programmable accounts, and international settlements. Every transaction will be traceable, every dollar controllable, and every crisis manageable by design. And who stands to benefit first? The very same network of financial elites that was bailed out in 2008. The system didn't collapse. It evolved. The final irony is that the Federal Reserve was created in 1913 to stabilize the economy and prevent panics. But in reality, it has institutionalized them. Every crash becomes an opportunity for expansion. Every bailout strengthens its reach. Every secret swap tightens the net. The Fed doesn't just manage crises. It manufactures the conditions that require one. Because in chaos, power centralizes. And the longer the public remains distracted, the more invisible that consolidation becomes. This brings us to the unanswered question. Where did the trillions go? The Fed claims it was all repaid, that the swaps expired and the collateral was safe. But here's the problem. No truly independent audit has ever verified those repayments. No journalist has been allowed to trace the full chain of recipients. And many of the foreign banks that relied on those swaps still show the same toxic balance sheets today, propped up only by more liquidity injections and accounting magic. In other words, the game never ended. When the next crisis comes, and it will, the blueprint is already in place. The Fed will step in again. It will print again. It will lend again. But this time, the operation won't be a secret. It'll be automated. We're looking at a global digital liquidity grid where the line between national and international money simply vanishes. A system where every central bank plugs into one source of creation, and where control isn't voted on, it's coded into the system. The Federal Reserve will no longer just be America's central bank. It will be the central bank of the world. And when that happens, the phrase "too big to fail" won't apply to banks anymore. It will apply to the entire system. Because in that world, failure won't be an option. Only control.